I'll start again. Good evening, members. Welcome to Strong Community Select Committee. I'll just read out the webcasting introduction. I would like to remind everyone present that this meeting will be broadcast live to the internet or filmed and will be capable of repeated viewing or another use by such third parties. Therefore, by entering the council chamber and using the seating area, you are consenting to being filmed and to the possible use of those images and sound recordings for webcasting and or for training purposes. No one wants to move? Fine. Item 2, apologies for absence.
We have none, Chair.
Okay, thank you. Also, no substitute members. Item 4, any declarations of interest? No? Fine. Right, pages 5 to 10, notice of the previous meeting. Has anyone got anything to add? Thank you, Councillor Amos.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. I noticed throughout the term sheltered housing was still used. I thought we were told last time that term had been changed and we didn't use sheltered housing anymore.
Yes, please.
Yeah, thank you, Councillor Amos. It is a term that we are still using, but we are hoping to move away from that. So we're looking at the support model within sheltered housing as it currently stands, and a piece of work is going on to think about how we change that support model to make it more needs-led. And then as part of that, we're looking at changing the name to independent living. So it is on the agenda, but hasn't quite happened yet. And
I just had that my name wasn't down for apologies, and I believe you said there was somebody else. Right, so everyone's happy with that. Right, you've got the terms of reference. I'm sure you all know those off by heart. So then we go on to... Oh, sorry, Stephen, Councillor Murray.
Yeah, just one item. In fact, 2 items on item 6, work programme, because I think it would be amiss if I didn't say to this committee, just in very short terms, what I intend pursuing at ONS on Thursday night. One of which might come to this committee, one might go to another select committee, but I'm very keen that there's some proper overview and scrutiny of the decision by the Cabinet taken at the last Cabinet meeting to explore charitable trust status for the museum. That probably would come here if that was agreed by ONS on Thursday, but I will explain at length on Thursday why I feel that that's something that needs scrutiny. But I just thought it would be very wrong if I brought it up on Thursday and hadn't at least had the decency to mention it tonight. And while I'm talking about the museum, can I be the first to congratulate them on their hidden gem status by Visit England? When I say the first to congratulate them, I mean the first to congratulate them tonight. And then the second thing that I'll be bringing up on Thursday at the main ONS committee, and I doubt very much if it will go to this committee, but because it might, I think it's only politeness that I mention it tonight. Again, only in passing. I'll develop the argument more clearly and in more detail on Thursday. But it's the fairly obvious one, if you've been following what's happened over several meetings, is a select committee, without a shadow of a doubt, does have to do some scrutiny on Qualis and housing repairs. So I will be bringing up both those items on Thursday, Madam Chairman, and hopefully ONS will agree to them, and I would have thought at least one of them will be coming to this committee. Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, it was mentioned at the last ONS that it's something that is being looked into. But as I was nearly whizzing off and not going through this, I would just, we do have a new name, maybe temporary at the moment, but Deborah Fenton is now no longer with us, so everything with her name on. We're calling on a Pam Wharf at the moment. But also looking through this, for our January, the items on January, because of all the various things that are going on, what we're looking to move all the January items to the March the 21st, because the March the 2nd is just the police one. So if I just let everybody know, because there's quite a lot of work going on, so it's really just to let you know that's what we'll be doing. So there'll be no meeting in January, but there'll be the two in March, the police one at the 7th and all the other bits and pieces, the 21st. Oh, Aniket.
Thank you, Chairman. Just to respond to Councillor Murray's point about the museum trust status coming back to scrutiny, it was one of the recommendations on the agenda. It was number 3, where the process to achieve an alternative operating model will be subject to scrutiny at the relevant committee.
Thank you, Chairman. That's excellent, but I've got some very precise suggestions about what ONS should be doing to carry that forward. But I know that Cabinet does have Cabinet approval, but ONS doesn't need Cabinet approval to carry out scrutiny. But it's great that Cabinet are happy. Could you just clarify, Chairman, what you said was happening with item 14 and 15, well, all the January stuff? When has that been deferred to?
It's being deferred to the 21st of March. Some of these items will be clubbed together. In fact, you may be able to clarify more because of the way things are changing, the way of working. Thank you.
Yeah, so what we're looking at is we'll bring the HRA business plan and the yearly performance update in at the March meeting. And I think the things around resident involvement strategy and tenant satisfaction measures, we may bring that as a broader item around the consumer regulations that are coming down the line, and those will form part of that item. But I think we could maybe perhaps broaden that item out and let you know what we're doing in response to the consumer regulations that are coming down the line as a whole. So we'll work toward that piece later in March as well.
We'll be keeping you busy, don't you worry. Scrutinising. Win? Yes? No, mine doesn't go off. Mine stays on.
Yeah, just that you said there's no meeting in January. I thought the housing strategy was being discussed, because I thought it was being discussed tonight, and then it had been put off until January again. So does that mean it's not going to get discussed at all?
The housing strategy is going to Cabinet in December.
But without being discussed at Select Committee first?
It has been.
When? Sorry. I was led to believe it should have been discussed at the last meeting, but because there was other business, it was being put forward to this meeting. But then because of the items that were coming up now, it was then being put forward to the January meeting. So as far as I know, it's not been discussed at all.
I'm just looking back at the work programme, and the overarching housing strategy came, as I understand it, in July.
It wasn't even written in July.
Yeah.
Who's speaking?
Janice.
Oh, Janice. I wasn't here then, unfortunately, because I was in hospital. But as far as I'm aware, that it was discussed then. So, Janice, have you got anything else to add?
Oh, she's on mute. You're on mute.
We can't hear you, Janice.
Hi, it first came to Stronger Communities stage 1 last year, and then it went through the full consultation period, and then it came back to Stronger Communities in July, and there were no material changes, and so between July and now all that's happened is the padding has been put into it, but everything that was agreed, it went to Stronger Communities, and everything that was agreed there has since been put into the full report. There's been no material changes at all, and that's what's going to Cabinet. Along with the report that went to Stronger Communities, the consultation report went as well. But I don't think Wynne was there, actually. I think that was one meeting, and I don't think Wynne was at the meeting. But we definitely went.
Well, in that case, I'm being given wrong information by certain officers on the council then.
Do you want us to take it up outside of this? Because I wrote and everything, absolutely, it's there. What the delay was, and if you have a look on the website, what the delay was it was due to go back to Cabinet in September, but we put back it into Cabinet to December because of other work that needed to happen. But there were no changes to it from when it went to scrutiny and was agreed. It's been through the democratic process 100%.
Oh, yes, I was here on that one. That was before my accident, because there's a new white paper, if you remember, and the officers were saying with the new white paper there was a lot that they had to look into, so there was going to be changes that it would come back to us. So, yes, that was before I was off, so I've told a little white lie there.
I just find it strange because as part of the Tenants Committee and also in the focus group that have been discussing this, it hadn't been finalised. The focus group were helping to finalise it. So I can't understand how it had been discussed at July when we were still discussing it, much later than that. But I will bring it up with the relevant officers tomorrow.
I think we're mixing up. The resident participation strategy and the overarching housing strategy, because the overarching housing strategy discussions, I've led and chaired all of those. What is being discussed at the moment still, and there are still focus groups going on with residents groups, is the resident participation strategy, and that's due to the consultation is continuing on that. I think perhaps it's mixing up the two. Absolutely, the housing strategy has followed to the letter democratic consultation process.
Everyone happy with that? Right, okay. Right, we're going on to item 7, which is it's actually to note, but Francesca is here about the museum. I'm not sure if she wishes to speak. Francesca.
Thank you, Chairman. So I'm just going to share with you a bit of an update report on the progress with the museum's rationalisation project. So this last came in September last year, so we're a year and a bit on, and I just wanted to share with you the progress made to date. So I'm just going to run through some of the key points in my report, and I welcome questions at the end if anyone has any. For those that heard the original presentation, you may be aware the museum has around 100,000 items in the collection across 4 storage locations, and we cover social history, archaeology, art, costume and textiles, ethnographic items and printed items as well. And these are the guiding principles that we're following with this project. So I just wanted to remind everybody that this is something that's set out by the Museum Association's Code of Ethics. So this has been followed throughout the process that the museum has been throughout the process of this project. So it's something that is guiding all museums that were to undertake a project like this to make sure that it is being done correctly. And these are the actual steps. So for anyone who wasn't aware, there's quite a process that needs to be gone through to be able to achieve this project. The main aims here are to ensure that the collection is relevant to our communities, and over time, various collecting policies and changes have meant that there are items in our collection that don't quite fit that policy. But in order to make sure we're doing it correctly, we need to do a full audit of those collections, and that just also makes sure we know everything about the items that we've got, and we can make sure we're sharing that information correctly. And then we move on to a scoring regime. We review any loans that we have that might need to be returned that we just haven't done yet. We also review any health and safety hazards that we might have in the collection. Once the final list has been created, this does go to a steering committee, which is made up of staff members, volunteers. There is a counsellor on that group, and there's an external consultant as well. And then that gets signed off by that committee, but there's also the option there for people to raise questions. The list gets signed off by the portfolio holder and is open to other councillor feedback as well. And then we follow the process under number 3 on how we remove the items from the collection. So you can see it's not something that's undertaken lightly. It's a really important process for us to do, but there's a really strict regime for us doing it correctly. So the key point of my presentation really is just to update you on the amazing achievements that have been made so far with this project. So to date, over 10,000 items have been reviewed as part of that phase 1 that I showed you on the previous slide. And I say 10,000 objects. The way it works in the museum is that sometimes the items are in groups of multiple objects. So we, doing a bit of maths, it's an approximate calculation, we think that actually equates to 30,000 items, because you may have an item that has 10 individual pieces within it. So thinking about 100,000 items, I think last time I came, there was a question about how long do we really think this is going to take. So in 2 years, we have done 30,000 items, which I think is a really good achievement to date. Nearly 4,000 have been through the second section of that, which is really good. So we've got the full research done, and it's been through that steering committee and portfolio holder phase. And then just over 550 have been removed from the collection through the various different methods that we need to follow. But that includes improving our education, handling, collection, moving things to other museums, objects being available to community groups and charities to use, but also the removal of any hazardous material. So just to clarify, that isn't the sole reason for removal. So if an item is really significant to the museum and the collection and the local area and is hazardous, we would still keep it, and then we would undertake a treatment process. But if it's not relevant and it's hazardous and therefore it's dangerous for anyone to work with, that would be a reason for us to move it on. And then I just wanted to highlight some of the objects we've found, and also some of the objects that have moved on to new homes. So you'll see here it's a very miniature set of dominoes. They were made by a prisoner of war during the Napoleonic Wars. So as far as we're aware, they're not directly related to the district, but there's going to be some more research undertaken, but we're also approaching people like the Imperial War Museum, etc., to find out whether that is something they'd be interested in. This camera is just one camera of several in our collection, but we found we actually had a large selection of cameras that were donated by Walter Drews, who was the principal of Wansfell College. It doesn't exist anymore, but it was in the district. It was an adult education college, but we've been able to undertake a lot of research on him, the connection with the cameras, and find out a bit more about the college's history. We've also made a start on reviewing our archaeology collections. So you'll see there a Roman tile with an animal footprint on it. So it's a really interesting object. We actually have one already in our education handling collection, and as I'm sure you can imagine, the children find it fascinating. So it's great to have another example in our main collections. We also came across, so this is the bottom left, the tiny little boats. So they were inside an OXO tin that was dated from August 1940. And we found these handmade little plastic boats. I think they're plastic or paper, I can't remember, sorry. But they were stamped underneath with the word Japan, and there's a newspaper lining in the tin that says 1944. So this is going to be a little project for us to try and find out a bit more about that, why we've got that. Unfortunately, there isn't a documentation to go with it, but hopefully we can find out a bit more about that story. We also came across quite a large group of items. So that's the next one along. A local man from North Weald who was conscripted to the Royal Corps Signals in the Second World War, and he served in New Delhi in India, and so we've sort of uncovered his story as part of this, and we are actually in our exhibition planning schedule, because in 2025 it will be 80 years since the end of the Second World War. We're planning an exhibition around that, so this collection will hopefully feature in that. And then finally, a story we did know about. So we did know we had items in the collection of tuck potteries, which were in Upshire and Waltham Abbey, but this particular item we hadn't seen before. So sometimes it's stories we have known about, sometimes we haven't, or sometimes it's just objects we've never actually had the chance to see before. So lots of things being uncovered with this project. And then just a quick whistle-stop tour of a couple of the items that have moved on to new homes. So top left, we've got some computer equipment that went to the Centre of Computing History. It didn't have a specific connection to the district, and they will be able to tell that story a lot better than us. The bottom left and the middle are some camera equipment and some games that have been transferred into our education handling collection. So again, not particularly relevant to the district, but really useful for handling reminiscence and schoolwork as well. The top right is a number of items that have gone, so there's some models there and a few other bits that have gone to the Ingatstone Museum Trust. And then bottom right, a beetle game that's gone to Bruce Castle Museum. So there's particular links between those items and those locations, which is why those items have gone there. That is the end of my presentation, so I'll welcome any questions if there are any.
Oh, Councillor Barlow, sorry.
Hello there. Hi, thank you for that. It was really interesting. I just want to know, it's just an interest of a question, really. Do they get loaned out for a certain amount of time, or is it all different to wherever they go?
So the items I talked about that have moved on, that's a permanent move, because we've just uncovered that there isn't really a story to tell within the district. And when you've got a limited amount of space and stories to tell, it's really important that we're telling the stories of the people of the district, not Ingatstone or whatever. Those have permanently moved. We do sometimes loan out our collections to other museums if they're telling particular stories that we can support with. Hope that makes sense.
Anybody else? Oh, Councillor Wixley, then I'll come back to you. Councillor Wixley.
Yeah, thank you. I think I asked this question the last time you were here, but I can't remember the answer. Could you give me examples of hazardous materials, which I find it a bit odd. I've got another question as well, actually.
Yes, so there are a lot of items in our collection that have asbestos and potentially degrading asbestos, for example. So things like gas masks, old electrical, anything that could heat often had a layer of asbestos in it. So as I say, so for example, we've done a review of all the gas masks in our collection. Some of them have a particular local story connected to them. We don't need 50 gas masks if 10 of them are going to tell that local story really well, and the others are degrading, and therefore they can't be handled by a volunteer, a staff member, or a member of the public safely. We do have measures to review them, so we make sure everyone's doing that safely, but it's important that they then get removed, because otherwise we're just potentially harming people that are engaging with the museum. But asbestos is one, lead could be another one, so paints have lead in it, lead piping, for example. So those are the kinds of things that I'm talking about.
Right, David. Yeah, go on then.
Yeah, I was interested in the Roman tile that you mentioned. You said it's got an animal's footprint in it. has the animal, or type of animal, not the animal, because it's dead, but the type of animal, has that been identified?
I'm not an archaeologist, I'm afraid. So what we're doing with the archaeology is we're doing an initial review, and then we will be seeking some specialist advice to help us properly catalogue those items. Some of them are done really well because they've come from specific sites. Unfortunately, again, the same as at all of our collections, there are some items that just haven't come with all the information. But we will be seeking some specialist advice, particularly for the archaeology, to make sure that we're identifying things correctly.
Thank you.
I think it would be interesting to know what sort of animal it is, because it may not, that sort of animal may not no longer be in this country, you never know.
Councillor Rackman.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you for the report. I mean, it's a fantastic museum, as we all know. I read that there's some funding coming forward, and I wondered whether you could tell us a little bit more about that, and also what will happen if the funding doesn't come forward. Will it change things in any way? Thank you.
So this project itself is being run independently, and it will carry on. Things will change throughout the project. So at some point we will have done all of the phase 1 work, and we'll be focusing on the research, or we'll be focusing on the transfer of the items. The project itself will carry on with volunteer support and the current staff support that we've got. The funding is for exploring specific areas within the collection. So we've got the Arts Council money that I think I mentioned in my report, and that's looking at the ethnographic project, and that's already started and in train. An exhibition will be going on display next year around that. I'm not going to say too much about the other funding that I mentioned. It's very positive news for that other funding, and that will play a part in this, but it doesn't impact on this project being able to continue, if that makes sense.
Right. Councillor.
Thank you.
Did you want to come back? Oh, right.
Councillor Hadley.
Yes.
No
All right,
tag.
I couldn't see your name.
I'm sure you know the provenance of most of the items which you've got there, but what if something which you didn't know the full provenance of actually found its way into this country by other means? Would you be prepared to return it to the country of origin?
So we do have items that are from other countries. So the ethnographic items is a really good example. That was items collected by the Buxton family. So they lived at Worley's in Upshire. But from all of our information, and we have done quite a lot of research on this, they were tourist items that were purchased on their travels. They were not things like you might hear about other significant things that are happening in the museum world where items are being repatriated to countries. As far as we're aware, we don't have anything that falls into that category, but if we do uncover anything like that, that will be part of our consideration.
Councillor Amos.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. I was pleased to read in your report, and as you've referred to this evening, that there are volunteers helping with this project. I just wondered how many there were, because I think it's quite commendable that people are prepared to give up their time and help.
In total, throughout the project, I think we've had about 19. Some of those have come and gone, so where we have particularly, for example, young volunteers who have then used it as a stepping stone to maybe get a job in a museum. So we've had that happen. So we've had about 19 people volunteer their time over the project. It can be an hour a week, it can be half a day a week, it can be a whole day a week. But we also do have some other volunteers that undertake other tasks. So we have a particular volunteer doing a lot of research for us on other projects. And we have had some kind of what I'd call like online volunteers that have been writing like blogs and supporting things like that for us.
Right, thank you. Councillor.
Thank you very much, Chairman. I just want to find out, have you found any item which you couldn't trace where it came from, or any article about the item, or anything at all to explain where the item is coming from? Have you ever come across such items?
Yeah, so unfortunately, this will never happen from now on because we have very strict procedures, but unfortunately in the past there has been the odd occasion where an item's been donated and someone hasn't fully taken down the history. If from what we can see there's a question, then it doesn't carry on through the process until we've undertaken full research to make sure that we're not removing something that we shouldn't do. Occasionally it will happen that we find something that we can't really get to the bottom of, but there'll be, for example, something obvious that links it to another locality in the country. So, for example, we had a load of slides that were of Exeter. We didn't really have much provenance in terms of why we ended up with them, but we knew that they were significant to Exeter, so it was the right thing that they moved on to Exeter Cathedral. So it does happen sometimes that we don't have the full information, but we make sure we research things properly before we make that final decision.
Councillor Murray, then Councillor Whitehouse.
Yeah, just 2 brief points, please. I wanted to thank the officer for her report, and I know the report was on a very specific part of the work of the museum, but I think it does serve to remind us how wonderful our museum is. So that's my first point. My second point, of course, is if you find anything really valuable, I think Councillor John Phillip would be delighted to hear, because he's looking for something about the value of about £4 million.
Councillor Janet Whitehouse.
Thank you, Chairman. I was interested to hear the reference when you showed the photos of the objects to Wandsworth College. I just wondered whether you, when you're doing research like that, whether you might or do advertise for local people who might have knowledge to come forward and contribute. We have a former councillor who was very involved in Wandsworth College, and she and I were both involved in the campaign to try and stop the closure of it. I'm sure there are other items where there's local knowledge out there which perhaps would contribute to the research you're doing. And the other question was, you mentioned the process that involves portfolio holder decisions. How many portfolio holder decisions on this has there been? Because I'm only aware of 2 so far.
So to the first point, yes, we do. We actually have a group of individuals from the community that are meeting at the museum that we can ask them about some of these items we found. With the cameras and Wandsworth College in particular, in the museum core gallery, we have got a changing exhibition of what's happening with the rationalisation project. So now that we've gathered some of that research, they will go on display, and then we will do a campaign to ask people to contribute information towards that. With reference to the, I think I wrote them in my report.
If you'd rather tell me later, that'd be fine. I just wondered whether other councillors were aware of the decisions too.
Seven. Mm-hmm.
Oh, right. Thank you.
Oh, Councillor Patel, Aniket.
Oh, there we go. Thanks, Chairman. Thank you. I'd just like to acknowledge the amount of work that's actually gone in to getting us to where we are at this present time. I remember when I first looked at the work that was being undertaken and the strict guidance that they had to follow. I was absolutely astounded that they'd actually put their hands up to say, right, this is what we're going to do. And so I'd like to thank Francesca and the work of the steering group, and also the volunteers that have all contributed to the progress that has already been made. I mean, I think in the report it states 1,000 hours of volunteering. There's going to be a few more thousand to come, I reckon, before we finish this piece of work. But sorry. But continue the great work, and we look forward to seeing the completion one day. Thank you.
Yeah, I will say that our museum does a brilliant job, even with the local communities and the children. So I just think it's an excellent place. But I must just mention, if you've never played the Beetle game, you should, especially if you've had a couple of beers. It's the funniest game. So it's just something that you should have a look into. So, but thank you very much for your report, Francesca. Right, now we go on to item 8. I'm sure you've all read the report, but we do have... Where is she? Jill. Sorry, Jill.
That's okay,
Jill.
Chairman.
Thank you.
Okay. Lovely. Lovely, thank you. Evening, everybody. We're just going to share screen. Lovely, thank you. So Fabrizio and I are here this evening just to give you a quick overview of the newly refreshed Epping Forest Health and Wellbeing Strategy. And we're also going to share an example of some of the associated project work that's being undertaken to support the delivery of the strategy in the district. So the Epping Forest Health and Wellbeing Strategy 22-26 sets out the aims and aspirations of the multi-agency partnership board to improve the health and wellbeing of everybody that lives in the district. Sorry. So the partnership board, as you can see from the logos on the screen, is made up of representatives not just of Epping Forest District Council, but also Essex County Council, the NHS, the West Essex Health and Care Partnership, and a whole range of local health and voluntary and community sector groups. The board is chaired by Councillor Aniket Patel, and Aniket's been our chair for the past 4 years, and currently the vice chair is Ian Tompkins from the West Essex Health and Care Partnership. So the board originally published its 10-year strategy back in 2018, but as a direct result of the COVID pandemic, the decision was taken to refresh the strategy early. And this was really so that the district really had a robust and a meaningful roadmap to maximise our resources and the expertise so that we could get the best possible outcomes for our residents. More than ever before, the COVID pandemic actually called organisations to work together collaboratively, and the refresh strategy really does aim to build on that momentum of the brilliant partnership working that we've got going on in the district. And the other thing that the strategy seeks to do is really maximise that growing self-awareness that we all had, I think, through COVID, of the things that individuals can do themselves to improve their own health and wellbeing. So on behalf of the Partnership Board, the Council's Community Culture and Wellbeing Service Area took the lead in facilitating 4 months of really extensive consultation to help inform the new strategy. So this took various different forms. We did face-to-face focus groups, mainly linked with our community champions who represent a whole range of districts, communities in the district. We did public consultation via Survey Monkey and an online questionnaire. We engaged with our youth council to seek the views of young people, and we facilitated specific workshops and discussion groups for our community and wellbeing directorate. And this all culminated in a stakeholder consultation event hosted here at the civic offices in June, which was attended by 55 representatives from over 30 organisations, which included the community and voluntary sector. So throughout that whole process, the findings and feedback were regularly taken back to the board, and emerging themes were also cross-referenced by officers with the Essex Joint Health and Wellbeing Strategy, which was also being refreshed around that same timeline.
Thank you, Jill. So throughout the course of the strategy and the formation of the strategy, we've used data and insight. In particular, data was used during the formation of the consultation period. We analysed data from public open source portals such as Fingertips and district profiles from the ICS, the Integrated Care Board. This analysis helped us identify the priorities and the needs for our district to then take forward in the consultation. However, as data is not always at a ward or at a lower super output level, we also worked with our partners to identify the needs at ward level and at an estate level to inform the consultation process. The data and insight helped us form the initial priorities on which to consult on. In addition to data and insight, we also analysed key strategies which were both local and regional, so Essex-wide. This was important to ensure that our strategy incorporates Essex priorities at a local level, but also ensures that our own district priorities can be fed into the wider Essex aims and objectives. This strategy in particular links into the aims of our own corporate plan, as well as the Essex Joint Health and Wellbeing Strategy and the Integrated Care Board's 10-year strategy.
So having carefully considered the views of our local residents, professionals, wider stakeholders, and looked at the hard evidence that Fab's just mentioned there, A number of key priorities were identified for our strategy. First being improving mental health and well-being, reducing loneliness and social isolation, increasing physical activity, supporting residents in relation to the rising cost of living, and tackling alcohol and substance misuse issues. But fundamentally, partners acknowledge that inequalities do exist within the Epping Forest District, and these inequalities have a huge impact on the health and well-being of our residents. So much so that the difference in life expectancy between some people living in our most affluent wards compared to our most deprived wards can be as much as 13 years for a male and 11 years for a female. So therefore, tackling and reducing health inequality is an overarching priority that runs through the whole strand of the strategy. So for each of the priorities, key objectives have been identified, and the details of these can be seen in pages 11 and 12 of the actual document. There's a shared commitment that partners will work together to develop a range of projects, initiatives and interventions to support those objectives. So moving on, underpinning the refresh strategy are also a set of agreed principles. And the first of these is around a whole systems approach. And the diagram that we've put there is the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation Social Determinants or Wider Determinants of Health model. And I'm sure most people are familiar with this now, but I think the thing that always strikes us when we look at this is that our wonderful colleagues in the NHS that provide clinical care do a great job, but in fact clinical care only contributes 20% to the overall factors that impact on our health and well-being. Probably more significantly are the socio-economic or the behavioural factors, so things like family support, fear of crime, how physically active we are, etc., etc. These are all really intertwined factors. So no one partner or agency can crack this one. We've really got to work together as a whole system to come together to move this forward. Further principles that have been agreed in the strategy are that around prevention and early intervention, so that we all know that prevention is better than cure. It's about self-care and management of our own well-being. So wherever possible, we want to support individuals or communities to take responsibility for their own health and well-being. And partners can actively help to build knowledge, skills and confidence so that people can make healthier life choices for themselves. There's a place-based approach, priority and principle, and this is really about recognising that there's certain areas in our district that have a higher level of need than others. And by targeting our collective efforts and resources on tackling the needs of specific geographic areas and by working with our communities around what we call an asset-based community development approach, so that's an ABC approach, we're aiming to reduce inequalities in certain parts of our district. And then finally, the principle is around a life course approach. So this is really just about recognising that we have different health and wellbeing needs at different points in our life. So moving on to governance and structure, ultimately it is the responsibility of the board to ensure that the delivery of the strategy happens, but that's supported by a number of various different action groups. We actually used the stakeholder event to talk to our partners about this. So back in 2018, along with the majority of other health and wellbeing boards in Essex, Epping Forest adopted the Live Well domains as a way to establish multi-agency action groups to deliver the strategy back then. And these were themed around Start Well, which covered pre-birth to 18 years, Be Well for working age adults and Age Well. However, with this increasing focus on addressing health inequality, it was universally agreed by partners that moving forward, it would be preferable to theme the action groups around the Robert Wood Johnson model. And that's very much aligned to what's happening in West Essex with the Health Inequalities Committee and with several other groups. So in establishing a new framework, consideration has been given to enhancing the way that we work with existing groups, which are already in place. So we really don't want to reinvent the wheel here. We've got really busy officers and people are attending multiple meetings. So An example of where we've used an existing group to feed into this structure is our own community safety partnership. And additionally, as you'll see here in the diagram, our colleagues in clinical care already have lots of existing groups and cohorts established. So for us, it's really been about identifying the most appropriate reps that are already on those groups to come and sit on the main board so that we link in that way. So the board meets quarterly, and it really is about overseeing the work of those action groups, and each of the action groups will have an annual action plan. And the board is committed to continually consulting with communities to seek their feedback on progress, and also to keep under review any emerging themes to ensure that these are captured and not missed as we move forward.
Thank you, Jill. So I'll just give you a practical example of how we put this strategy into practice and into place. So as mentioned by Jill, we're working on a place-based approach, and one of the things we've been doing in Waltham Abbey and Ninefields area in particular is putting this into practice. So we've been using a practical example of how the Robert Wood Johnson model is being delivered in the area. So in the area, we've used the Robert Wood Johnson model as a framework and an approach to tackling health inequalities. By using this approach, we're ensuring we develop a range of projects and interventions that have an effect on all of those wide determinants of health, not just health and at the end, but also socioeconomics, the built environment, and healthy behaviours. The approach effectively started in April. In April, we came together with a range of partners, as you'll see at the bottom there in the picture. Over 40 people attended from 20 different organisations. The intention was to look at the priorities and the needs of the area and come to solutions that would meet the partners' aims and objectives as well. So it's not about asking people to do more, but it's about asking people to contribute and focus resources on that particular area. Since then, over £500,000 of investment has come to the area, from Safer Streets funding to other funding for other activities such as Active Essex. The funding has seen 18 different projects and interventions being developed. Some of these include Essex County Fire and Rescue's 3 days of action, which took place at the end of August. The day was supported by Epping Forest District Council and facilitated by the Community and Culture team. 13 different partner agencies were involved in the day, over the 3 days of action. And the event knocked on all the doors on the estate. And over 100 onward referrals were made onto different partner agencies for support. We also have Citizens Advice, who have been running a fantastic financial wellbeing hub. The financial wellbeing hub came from funding from COMF, which was containment outbreak funding from the West Essex CCG at the time and also Essex County Council, but was facilitated by ourselves at Epping Forest District Council. The hub offers a one-stop shop for residents who might have financial and mental health wellbeing issues. And as you'll see there, over 165 of our most vulnerable residents have been supported through the course of that project to date. We're also developing a project around road and court champions to aim to use the asset-based community development principles and really develop on the projects we're doing and sustain them and grow them. In the new year, we'll be looking to add to the projects we're developing with a financial training package. We'll be taking training to local people and running training locally. We'll also be doing a recruitment event to support our NHS colleagues and other colleagues with local recruitment and trying to get more local recruitment into the area, so we're actually going out to our communities to recruit rather than expecting them to come to us. We're hoping to do this to improve and maximise our residents' opportunities and maximise the opportunities that our district has in terms of financial and training. In total, over the project, 20 partners are involved in the estate and over 900 residents have been engaged. This model of work is being seen as a model of best practice by Essex County Council, and they're looking to replicate it across Essex. And we're also looking to replicate this across the district once we've completed some of our key projects in this area.
That's the end of our presentation, but we're happy to answer any questions that you might have.
Thank you. Oh, Councillor Rackman.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you for the report. Can I ask if you've looked at the cost of living crisis in your report? And also, I think we may be expecting a downturn, and I think we might go into quite a deep recession. Can I ask if there's anything you've put in place for those incidents, if they do occur? And do we have anything that we can offer people that may find themselves are hitting hard times because of what may be coming down the line? Thank you.
Yeah, certainly. Thank you for the question. One of the 5 key priorities that's been highlighted within the strategy is supporting residents in relation to the rising cost of living. And if you look on page 12 of the actual strategy, it highlights 4 headline objectives that partners have agreed to be very, very important, and we will be coming together as a whole system to look at that. Speaking from the perspective of Epping Forest District Council, we've got, you know, an eye on this, a very close eye. We've established things like our warm places, which are there to support residents who may be really struggling with the idea of putting their heating on. We've developed a range of resources and signposting, but absolutely, it's not one thing, one agency. It's going to be a whole systems approach, and I think that's the power of this strategy, that it has actually drawn that out as one of the 5 headliner priorities to be a focus.
Councillor Barlow, I will get used to you all.
Hi, thank you so much for that. So away from being a counsellor, I'm also a physiotherapist, so I clinically lead a lot of projects similar to this, but very small, on a smaller scale, and did the original one in the late 90s, which was a government scheme, and it's called Health of the Nation at the time, so I was very interested in this, so thank you for presenting that this evening. Obviously, what we found originally was that every area obviously is very different. So you can turn around and say, okay, well, you know, one size doesn't fit all for absolutely everywhere. And where we are in Chigwell, we do have a massive divide. So we have those that are more on the poverty line and those that are totally the opposite scale. And what we found is that we've had to address every area and for their own particular individual needs. So we have a place called Limes Farm, so now to get the children off the street, we've now got a football team. And so now they're supported, and we have the funding, and they are all given healthy food to eat when they're there. So we had something this evening, and then what we do, we put out just things like the very fresh fruit or vegetables that they can come and nibble on. So it's teaching them from a young age that this is really the way that you can live, and also it's actually quite cheap to be able to eat this way, and not to just grab, you know, the fast kind of like foods, and also to get them active, which is now getting their parents involved. And one of the questions years ago was, is it more education or is it promotion? And that's something we used to really struggle with, and we ended up saying, okay, well, it's education to the children and then promotion to those a little bit older, so that we could promote that health and fitness, but educate the youngsters coming through. Otherwise, they're never going to change. So my question, sorry to go around the houses, but with children, so we've spoken about all of this, but how are we going to deliver, you know, all these healthy messages for the children?
So again, that is through a whole partnership approach. So we've got some fantastic partners locally. So we have the Essex the children's service, basically, which was Bernardo's and Virgin Care. There's been projects in the past where we've all worked together, gone into certain primary schools. We've talked about healthy eating. We've run programmes to encourage the Daily Mile, which is another initiative that we very much want to pick up and run within the district through our colleagues at Active Essex. But yeah, absolutely, it's about every age and focusing on the needs in terms of children, recognising children live in families. So we can go in, we can do lots of education with the children themselves about healthy eating, but if we're not reaching out to the families and the mums and the dads and the carers that are doing the cooking, so we've got to take that approach. But we've done projects and we've had ideas in the past about providing slow cookers and recipes that may go along with that, cooking on a budget. All of these sorts of things are projects and interventions that we can come together and work on.
Question. So will you go to the schools then? So is that how it will be delivered, via the schools or more action group?
So it could be in a variety of ways. So there's a whole plethora of activities and projects and initiatives that have been running over the years. There will be things that will be developed as a result of the objectives highlighted in here, and it will be for the most appropriate partner to pick that up and run with it. So it could well be some of our third sector partners may lead on something like that. So, for example, in Uttlesford, there's a cookery programme that's underway there that's received some external funding. We could potentially be looking to roll that out. We've got our fantastic community champions, and on Limes Farm we've got a fantastic cohort of local volunteers that come together. So there's a whole range of ideas and initiatives that we're really keen to work together to develop and roll out.
Thank you. Councillor Amos, then Councillor Wixley.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. This is a very commendable strategy, but looking at it is going to take quite a long time because there are massive societal and cultural changes which are called for. And it doesn't mean we shouldn't aim for them, but I think it's going to take quite a long time. I was interested to hear a bit about the action groups. I'm not going to ask you to go over them again this evening, but at a future time I would like to hear more about what they were doing. But if I could just pick out one small point from your slide, you talked about court and road champions. Could you tell us a little bit more what that means, please?
Yes, so we call court and road champions because on the Nine Fields area of Waltham Abbey, it's courts and roads. So effectively, the estate, if we want to put it in a better word, is made up of courts and roads. So we couldn't call them court champions because that would obviously exclude the roads. The idea behind court and road champions is similar to our community champions programme. It's about identifying that person within that local community, within that court, that area, who can really promote messages around health and well-being, around projects, really help us develop these projects that we want to do in this area. And it's also about building in community resilience. So it's about finding those residents who will then take on projects, run with things, want to develop volunteering, want to develop things in their area to make the area better. And that's ultimately the idea behind court and road champions.
Councillor Wixley, then.
Yeah, thank you, Chairman. First of all, I think I'll thank Fab again because he did give a presentation at Loughton Town Council quite recently. So this is my second showing of this, which I appreciate. Yeah, I think one of the things which emphasises to me, and I hope this report will reinforce that, is the value of having green spaces near where people live. I think it's particularly important that this message gets reinforced to this council, bearing in mind they were going to build on Jessel Green not very long ago, but fortunately the inspector and their wisdom threw that one out. So I do think that's very important to have green spaces near where people live so they can go for informal recreation or perhaps more formal types of recreation. One thing that caught my eye on the slides, it was reference to financial wellbeing hub. I just wondered if you could explain a little bit more about that, if that's a source of revenue coming from somewhere.
So the Financial Wellbeing Hub is run by our Citizens Advice colleagues, and it's really all about helping people maximise their income. So it's about identifying particularly people who might be digitally excluded or may not know that they're entitled to certain types of benefits. But they've also taken this further. They're also working with people to do budgeting training. We're using funding from Essex County Council to do Multiply, which is a new programme about improving people's math skill. So it's really a package around helping people around financial well-being. But also it was recognised by Citizens Advice and ourselves and other partners as well, that financial wellbeing then brings with it other issues around mental health and other elements. So we actually have colleagues from EPUT there offering mental health support. So you've got a range of 7 to 8 partners every week on a Tuesday in Epping, in Waltham Abbey Leisure Centre, to support residents, and people can drop in and they can make an appointments. And ultimately the aim is to have a one-stop shop for any issues around financial and mental health well-being that they can deal with. It is a model we're looking to replicate across other areas of the district as well, because it has been very, very successful.
Just the last time.
You always say that to me. I was really just going to pay a compliment because I think all the things that you do is just, you know, fantastic really, because there's also the booklet, which is the What's On booklet, and I did have somebody complain to me some time ago that there wasn't enough to do in the district, but I put them right, I think, and they were quite surprised when I told them all the things that there are to do, and I've heard no more since. So.
Councillor Newitt.
Thank you very much, Chairman. Thank you for this very good report. But something stood out for me, and I thought I will ask, as someone that suffers from long COVID, I know the impact, serious impact long COVID has. Going through the report, didn't see anything mention of long COVID and the impact it's having within the community, because I know that due to the serious issue we have currently on long COVID, it has impact on your mental health and your well-being. So what is the plan for picking up those that are going through struggles linked to long COVID?
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right, Councillor Nweke. I think that will be one for our clinical action group to have a look at, and if, you know, I'm sure there are lots of initiatives and ideas that will emanate out from that group, and if there are wider, more cross-cutting support projects or ideas or programmes that can come down the line to focus on that, I'm sure they absolutely will. But in terms of all 5 themes, really, I think they all interlink. So the, you know, support around mental health, increasing physical activity if it's possible to do so, etc., etc. But it's a high-level strategy, and I would say that probably that will be driven through our clinical group and, you know, radiate through the wider themes if there are things to be picked up there.
Okay, Councillor Murray.
Thank you, Chairman. I want to touch on 5 areas, 2 of which I think are questions. So the first one, I agree with all the comments that were made about the report. Like Councillor Wixley, this is the second bite of the cherry on the report for me, which is very useful. Really important, page 13 that outlines how we will measure success. And I would like to think that at some time this scrutiny panel, not perhaps by project, or perhaps even project by project, we'll have a look at some of these success criteria and have that fed back to us. I do want to just pick up Councillor Wixley on one point he made. I mean, he was absolutely right about the importance of green space, but he almost spoke as if the inspector made a decision in a vacuum. She responded to a massive, the biggest community campaign I've seen in this district in 40 years. EFDC were quite happy to ignore it, but the inspector weren't. And I do not believe for a minute the inspector would have made her recommendations if it hadn't been for, say, the Jessel Green campaign. And I always think that their work should be acknowledged. Thirdly, and I think my first question, the officers made some reference to background information on a ward basis. I would be interested in seeing that, the statistical information that's available on ward basis. I'm assuming that's mainly coming from the census, but I would be interested in seeing that. I think it has been provided in the past. It's not necessarily something that every member would want to see, but I certainly would want to make a request to see it. So, is that possible?
Yeah, thank you, Councillor. Yes, that is possible. Most of the data is open source data, as I mentioned, so it's available on government websites. That particular data at ward level is on the What Was the Fingertips NHS data page, so I can send links for that.
Thank you. The fourth thing I wanted to highlight was, again, quite explicitly from the report, because I just think, you know, we think of Epping Forest, and one of the other councillors that's touched on this in terms of Chigwell. But on page 5, when I read page 5, and I've got it in front of me tonight, it didn't come as a total surprise, but because I live in the real world. But if you read it in black and white, life expectancy 13 years lower for a man, and I know the officer referenced that, and 11 years lower for a female, between the most deprived areas of Epping Forest and the most affluent. That's just not acceptable, is it, Chairman? And we do need to do something about it. And then 12% of children are living in poverty in Epping Forest, and 11% of older adults are living in poverty. And I think that just serves to remind us the disparities in our area. And linked to that, Another councillor referenced this is really good stuff, but it's going to take a long time to achieve. I do just want to remind members again, because I don't want to be pessimistic, but I've been around a long time, and there was such a thing called the Black Report that was published in 1980. It was a really big report. It's been the fundamental principles outlining how the report was drawn up has been used across the world. And that was, what, 42 years ago, outlining these massive health inequalities. And we've still got them now, 42 years on. So we haven't got something right as a society, but I'm not expecting the officers to comment on that. And then the one area that I finally want to touch on, and you know, Chairman, I don't like to be difficult, but it's just a feeling I have. But it's more than a feeling, because I think there's quite good evidence. All the general projects that we do around the health strategy and all the general projects that we do from the community team, I feel are fairly shared around the district. I feel that very strongly. I'm very passionate that all parts of the district are treated fairly in our general programme. But I just do think that in terms of our Pacific in place projects, Waltham Abbey, Shelley, Limes Farm, I have absolutely no problems with those areas getting attention, but Fairmead, Broadway, Alderton, by any look at the census indices, are very deprived parts of our district as well. And apart from the generic programme that's delivered across the district, and we get our fair share, I do just feel that those three wards, in terms of concentrated projects, when are we going to reach them? Because we haven't reached them yet.
Thank you. Councillor Helen Kane.
Thank you, Chairman. A couple of questions. I was taken by surprise. In the national television, I watched a series of adverts, staying healthy, community clubs, and although it said active Essex, are we in any participation at all on this series of adverts?
Thank you, Councillor Kane. So in terms of Active Essex are one of our partners and they do chair our Healthy Behaviours Action Group. We do take advantage of Active Essex funding, so there has been Active Essex funding gone into Ninefields to develop projects, particularly with our partners from Places Leisure and then many other community organisations. We're doing quite a lot with Active Essex. We highly support their priorities, so I'm not sure the advert you're referring to, but we do work closely with Active Essex and utilise their funding to develop projects all across the district.
It is in national television. And the other thing is, I would like to know, how would you actually determine that your excellent work anyway, how you actually determine if it is successful or not? What is the criteria that will make you feel that has been successful?
So in each case, for each of the action groups, the partners will agree the project or initiative, and at that stage, impact measures will be agreed collectively between the partners so that it will actually be possible to hopefully measure change and improvement. In some cases, I think we need to be realistic about that, and it will be, as well as quantitative data, there'll be qualitative data. So I think it's really important that we acknowledge and recognise that case studies and hearing people's stories will actually feed into that, that measuring and evaluation of the work. We've got an excellent framework that's been adopted through the West Essex Health Inequalities Committee, actually, which is almost like a plan on a page, and there are agreed numbers and facts and figures within that. So we will be rolling that out and adopting that framework and that model of good practice around evaluating for all of the projects that are undertaken, and that will be fed up to the board accordingly.
Can I ask them one more question, please, Chairman?
Yes, you may.
Yeah. will it be possible for you, Jill, to come back or to actually tell us, you know, about your findings and the successes?
We'd be delighted to come back to the committee on an annual basis, or however the committee would like to receive that report to feedback on progress.
Yeah, I think
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. And Councillor Rose Brooks.
Thank you very much. Firstly, can I say that congratulations on the way this has been presented. The report's very attractive, it's very visual, it's not heavy reading, with some clear headline figures that one can come away with after reading it for 15 minutes, in fact. And not all documents are like that. So thank you for making it very presentable. Though part of what I have to say has been covered by Councillor Murray, not all of it has. Just to say that those excellent initiatives, which I know that you've looked at, particularly the one at Waltham Abbey, based in the leisure centre, which the CAB and others were partnering. Now, you have an advantage in Waltham Abbey in the location of the sports centre, but we also, as Councillor Morris pointed out, do have similar needs in Loughton. And when I went to CAB AGM, they said they had no plans to do any sort of outreach in Loughton. But I would just flag up that there's tremendous potential and need in the Oakwood Hill Estate and Broadway ward particularly. And there is the Restore have done work with Active Essex, with holiday clubs providing meals at lunchtime, along with, which has been gone down very well, taking children from the Alderton school recommendations. But two things I'd like to flag up really is really the Alderton Children's Centre, the Sure Start, was closed a few years ago. But that was something that many of the parents, particularly those on their own, used a lot. And I feel that everyone knows there is a real crisis in mental health, particularly of children and young people. And I would just like to flag it up really, that you would, it's just in a state of crisis in our area and lots of others. People have got long waits for referrals, and that anything you can do to help the mental health of children and young people. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Brooks. So, yes, we'll feed this back through the PCN and our primary care network colleagues, but it's well known this is an issue. And we have recently, and over a number of years, actually supported organisations such as Spark that do help with mental health of children and young people. We also work very closely with Mind and other organisations. Mind have got a great funding programme going into schools at the moment and doing lots of work around mental health. We're also working closely with other youth organisations in the district to try and get more youth programmes into Loughton and other areas to support mental health and wellbeing of children and young people. So there is quite a bit going on in this space in what capacity we have and we can do. But obviously I'll feed that back to colleagues within the PCN as well, and then the wider ICS.
Councillor Murray then. Councillor
It's not a new point, Chairman, but I think you moved on to the Zoom councillors before the officers had a chance to answer my last question. When was the good work that's been done in the one-off projects that have been done in Shelley or Waltham Abbey or Limes Farm, when was that model going to be available? Maybe different projects, because there's different needs. When was that model going to be used in some of the equally deprived parts of Loughton? And it's not special pleading, Chairman, because I'm not talking about the ward I represent.
Councillor Patel.
They didn't. It was a question. It wants an answer from them, from the officers.
Yeah, it was just that the officer.
I'm happy to come in, Councillor Murray. Thank you for that question. Yeah, you're absolutely right. In terms of the data and evidence, I think we know historically Epping Forest District has 4 super output areas, of which Oakwood Hill and the Loughton area is one of those. And there are absolutely plans to replicate and roll out the excellent whole systems approach that we've adopted within Ninefields longer term to those areas, we'd absolutely be delighted to do that. We have done in the past, but I grant it's been a while since we've done that, but I think there is definitely the will for partners to come together to do more across those wider areas as well.
Thank you, Chairman.
Right, sorry about that, Councillor Murray. Now, Councillor Patel.
Thank you, Chairman, and thank you for allowing me to come in at this stage. So, thank you for allowing us to bring forward the refresh strategy to your committee, and thank you to the members also for their questions. I think you'll all agree that refreshing the strategy at this time was absolutely the right thing for us to be doing when you consider the impact of COVID-19 and the fallout from that in the social space. So the effects that it's had on the wider determinants of health and health inequalities has really shaped the way in which this strategy has been put together. When I first became a councillor, I got involved in looking at the youth strategy, but part of that work was also looking at the different organisations that existed within the community. And one of the things I found then was how many partners existed, but also as well the amount of duplication that was taking place at that time, and the same was in the health space as well, in the elderly space. And I think so the work that we've done now through the board, and again I'd like to thank the officers for this, for building these relationships up, not just over the last 2 to 5 years, but over 10 to 15 years, where people that they started off working with now hold senior positions in other organisations. And I think that's absolutely paramount to the success of the board and bringing forward some of these projects, like the Ninefields Estate project, for example, which was essentially born from the social isolation piece of work, project that we did in Buckhurst Hill. So the partner, the event that we held, the stakeholder event that we held here in the civic offices, I gave the closing remarks that day, and it was absolutely brilliant. The amount of energy in the room, and all the partners wanting to come together and wanting to do something positive for the Epping Forest area. Just where we are now in the health space, I think it's really important to appreciate that there's been a lot of reorganisation of health organisations, and we've now got, I call them the acronyms, but you've got the ICP, the ICS, and the ICP. And what I will say now, to give members reassurance, we are extremely well represented now in the health and wellbeing space. So Georgina, our Chief Exec, is on the main Essex Health and Wellbeing Board, and I know that Jen Gould also represents us at some of the higher strategic organisations, as does Jill, and also Councillor Holly Whitbread, who unfortunately was unable to come tonight, is the Deputy Portfolio Holder for Adult Social Care, and also sits on one of the boards. So going back to one of the slides, which was looking at the new delivery structure of the board, I think the main thing that stands out on there is actually how many partners we have now on board who are contributing to making this strategy a success. And Councillor Murray, the action groups that that have previously existed under the board, we did used to come to this committee and present the successes that we had through the course of the civic year. Unfortunately, last April, our presentation was missed, but more than happy to come back. I mean, one of the things I keep saying to the team is we need to shout about the successes that we have within the district, because our communities team, but also our board, is one of the leading lights within Essex, and some of the projects that we have initiated have been rolled out across the whole of Essex, and I think that's something that should be acknowledged. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you. Councillor Hadley.
Thank you, Chair. Nitty-gritty really, going back to delivery and governance, and a few of the other councillors have mentioned this. I see nothing about timescales. I see nothing about success or the measurement of success. That leads on to cost. I see nothing about cost, and there will be a cost. So, you know, and value for money, I know that goes with the success criteria, but where is this costed?
So the reality is that the Epping Forest Health and Wellbeing Strategy itself doesn't have a budget, but what it has are a whole range of partner agencies, has community themselves, and it has that will to work collaboratively to come together to align the existing resources that we've got for a better outcome. So I think something that Councillor Patel said just now is really pertinent, that I think in the past it's been evident that there's been lots of people working within this space and potential duplication, and equally potentially gaps of provision. But what the strategy does is aim to try and pull together all of the resources that we do have at our disposal and start to work smarter. I think it's about absolutely acknowledging that we're in very, very difficult times. Every organisation is the same. No one organisation has got the silver bullet to solve these things. And in fact, it's as much about putting people at the centre of this and helping and supporting people to do things for themselves, actually. So there will be money, and there is money coming down for specific projects and initiatives, for example, through the children and young people, through various different avenues. But by being plugged in strategically, for example, to the emerging integrated care partnership, where you've got the NHS and social care now coming together and managing quite significant budgets, by having a voice in those forums, we're able to bring that right down to place-based level locally, to put ourselves in the best possible position to bid for and lever in any external funding that is available to us. But predominantly, actually, to be honest, it's about working within existing resources.
Thank you.
Very quickly, but there is a cost. The cost is the team.
The cost is the team, I think he said, yeah. Yeah. Right, I'm just going to take this one last question. I will let you speak, Annika, in 1 second. Because we need to wind this up and things can come back at a later date as things move on, so that we can discuss more and more and see what's going on. But if I'll just take your question and then...
Okay.
I know, I'm terrible. I can't see the names today.
Don't worry, thank you, Annika, for that. I think it's a fantastic scheme. Well done for all the work that you've been doing on this. You know that I've got the health care in common with you. So just a couple of questions. How are we auditing this every year? Because obviously you're going to have different agencies in different areas. Is there a timetable of events? How are we auditing it? You know, is it, because normally when you audit, you're auditing on something from the previous year or the previous time that you've done something, so you've got statistics there. How are we auditing how well everything's going to be from Loughton, Chigwell, Buckhurst Hill? How are we doing that?
So I think there's no one size fits all on that one. I think as the individual action groups get up and running and new initiatives or projects are started, there'll be an agreed starting point benchmark, I'm sure, through all of the agencies, and then an agreed set of targets, or what does good look like? What is it that we're hoping to achieve? Projects will be of different durations. They'll take different forms. So I think this is really for the partners to agree together. Ultimately, the board will receive update reports on a quarterly basis from each of the project leads or from each of the leads of the themed action groups. And there is also that golden thread between our local Health and Wellbeing Board and that of Essex County Council as well. So there is an overarching Health and Wellbeing Board for the county, and it's good practice for each district to have its own as well. So there will be measures in impact evidence gathered, but it will be very bespoke, I think, for the individual projects and initiatives.
Thank you. And Councillor Patel.
Thank you for allowing me to come back, Chairman. So I just wanted to respond to Councillor Headley's comments. regards to there being a cost to the council for the staff that actually contribute to the work. It's quite right. But what must be said is that the work of the board and of the Communities Directorate in particular is the non-statutory responsibility of the council. And so the work that takes place, though, is very, very much customer facing, and it's what affects our residents on a day-to-day basis. So it's very difficult sometimes in the health space to be able to put tangible monetary values to the work that takes place. And this is one of the challenges that I keep putting forward to say, well, how much does that actually cost? In reality, we don't actually know how much it costs, because the actual impact of the work that we do is more around prevention. It's about preventing what may happen later in life. And I think that's really important to know that, yes, X amount of man-hour has gone into a particular piece of work, but actually the cost to the system later down the line has been saved. So I hope that clarifies the question that you raised.
Thank you. Well, I think you all do a very good job. And I also will just bring up the Lee Valley Christian Church, which is almost opposite where I live. And I'm sure they're not the only people that do it, but they do a free coffee morning on a Monday, just for anyone who's lonely and wants it. It costs them nothing. They don't shove religion down your throat or anything. They've started on a Friday, free soup and rolls for people from 11 o'clock till 1. And I'm sure there's quite a lot of other companies that do that, and it's a shame that maybe we can't get in contact and bring them in on the group, because they've got a lot to offer. Thank you.
So what I would actually say is we're plugged into an awful lot of those wider community groups, and in fact there is something called Frontline, which is a portal which we can capture all of the activities and events that are going on in the district on that. And that is something that all of our partners can use, and people can actually also self-refer through that. So an awful lot of these groups and activities are all on Frontline, and if they're not, we'd like to know about them, because we can put them on there. Even our GPs actually do have access to Frontline, and all of that information is captured. So that is something, that's a key message that we're really keen to get out, that we are capturing all of the things that are available to our communities.
I should get them in touch. Right, now, we're going on to item 9, which is the annual lettings report, and I'm not sure, is this just for noting or run through quickly?
Yeah, Janice will do a quick...
oh, right. Okay, Janice, you've got 5 minutes. Sorry.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Well, I hope that you've all read the report, and if you haven't read it in lots of detail, it's going to be up on the web for the rest of the year and going forward anyway, so that's fine. I've just covered the salient points for you. It's a report on the allocation of social housing between 2021 and 2022, and a snapshot of the waiting list of the housing register on the 31st of March 2022. It relates to allocations that were made in accordance with the allocation scheme in place that applied for 2018 to 22. The reason I'm letting you know that is because there's a new allocation scheme that became effective in September of this year, and that will be reported in and reflected on in the next year's annual lettings report. So in terms of the information, the number of properties that were let during the last year fell slightly. They were 404, slightly down on the 2021 figures. 90% of lettings were at social rents, which are usually lower than affordable rents. In terms of waiting times, Band A, Band B and homeless households typically wait between 1 to 2 years, and people in Band C wait between 2 to 5 years. It also looks at people in council housing stock that the council need to move for urgent reasons. They're called landlord transfers, and they're usually because of urgent safety reasons, either because there's a risk of health and safety to the individual person because of hate crime, or potentially because they need to be decanted for major work to the property and it's a permanent move. And 18 people in that year were moved in this way. There were 82 mutual exchanges. That's a notable increase on the 69 from the year before. And very interestingly, there were the properties sold through the right to buy more than doubled on from the previous year. So they went from 14 in the previous year to 30. As far as the housing register is concerned, the people that are waiting on the housing register to be rehoused, we take a snapshot on the 31st of March each year because it's a live waiting list, and that gives us the best comparison. And in fact, the number of people on the waiting list reduced slightly from 1,355 the previous year to 1,308. You'll note in the report that there are 6 former members. This is something that particularly I wanted to draw to your attention, that there were 6 former members of the armed forces or bereaved spouses waiting to be housed. And the year before, we didn't house anybody that fell into that category of former members of the armed forces. So we had a detailed look at each of those cases individually to see why it would appear that those people weren't being housed. And in fact, each of the cases, the situation was in keeping with their place on the waiting list and their bidding history. Essentially, people weren't necessarily bidding, or they hadn't been on the waiting list for long enough to qualify for the properties they were bidding for. And finally, on the waiting list for that year, we had 75 people that were classed as we had a main duty to house because of homelessness. That's my 5 minutes. If you have any questions, please let me know.
Councillor Murray.
I've got a few questions, Chairman. Well, I'm afraid I've got quite a lot, but I'm going to restrict myself to 2. I've reminded myself of the bands and the categories of need on page 33 of the main agenda. I'm going by the agenda page numbers, or is it 93? Anyway, the priority bands A to C, and obviously the categories of need are greater, but there are a number of important needs in B where you understand why people would move to larger accommodation. But I was still surprised that on the next page, only just under 15% of the lettings go to Band A, while over 30% to Band B. In one way, it's good that Band B are getting, are accessing quite a number of properties, but I just wondered why the percentage for Band A was, relatively low. I would have expected the 2 bands to be nearer each other rather than one be double the other. I'm sure there may well be a statistical reason for that. And my second question, and I am restricting myself just to 2, Madam Chairman. There are others I could have asked, but I'm trying to exercise a bit of responsibility for once. On the following page, you've got properties let by rent type, affordable rent and social rent, and somewhere in the report it explains that affordable rents are significantly higher than social rents, and we know that anyway. So I just wondered if you've got any way of telling whether a property being affordable rent or social rent affects people's bidding, and will they only bid for social rent properties rather than affordable rent properties? Thank you, Chairman.
Yes, thank you, Jim. Oh, the squeaky thing.
Yeah, thank you, Councillor Murray. Your first point about the percentage of lets to Band A, largely that's because downsizers are in Band A. and so they are after very specific properties that don't come up very often. So that's generally why you find that the percentage of people in Band A, the lets are lower. So I hope that covers that off for you. I think the short answer to your second question is no, we don't have a way of knowing that. I mean, I suppose the whole premise of choice-based lettings is that we are giving applicants licence to choose to bid on those properties that they think are going to suit their family's needs. And there may well be applicants on the register that look at rent and think that that is either affordable or not. So I don't think we do have a way of making that distinction. What I will say, though, is that we don't get affordable properties with no bids on. So they are still, as you know, the demand for social housing far outstrips supply. So there isn't a problem letting those properties. And as part of any let, what we will do is assess financial affordability as part of that let anyway. So we wouldn't set anybody up to fail. So they are still certainly in demand and meet a need that is out there.
Thank you.
Well, I've actually got a question. I see on this about the armed forces, and Janice saying about that there's so many on there, they haven't been on the list long enough. Now, I don't think it's changed from when I was in the forces, but when you come out of the army, you're made homeless, that's it. Your husband or your wife, whoever it is finishes their service and that's their homeless. You're homeless. Now, me, for instance, I come from here, but we could be discharged in Glasgow. So we wouldn't be here, although this is my hometown. So, and it's saying only ones with serious injury. And I don't think perhaps people coming out of the army realise, because you're told, yes, you are given some sort of priority, but how can you be given priority here if you're discharged in Edinburgh or somewhere, but this is your hometown, so this would be where you expect to be able to come, because you are told in there that you're given priority, because obviously they can't leave you as a family in an army property because it's needed for people. So can you help me out on that?
So there are sort of two roads, if you like, into social housing, and a housing register is one of them, but it certainly isn't the most responsive. So Janice outlined actually some of the waiting times that people are experiencing. So where somebody comes out of the army and they are homeless, and they have a local connection to a place, and that's not necessarily where they've been discharged, they would make a homelessness application probably to that place, and we would respond slightly differently under a different piece of the legislation. So there is provision within the legislation to respond to people in those sets of circumstances. It's slightly different from the housing register, and it's a slightly separate part of it. It's two different parts of the Housing Act, but the provision is there certainly for those sets of circumstances.
All right, thank you. And the other thing is, if someone obviously can't for some reason be put on the housing list, not because they haven't lived here for years, but because of whatever circumstance, and they have to rent privately, I mean, they must be able to get some assistance. But when you look at, I can just name one person I know that's paying like £1,300 a month rent. I mean, we can only give so much assistance. So what happens with people like that just can't afford, but don't come on any of these lists?
So the welfare benefit system will play its part in that. So people, depending on what their income is, may well be able to claim housing benefit or the housing element of universal credit to help them pay their rent. But we do know we are in a high cost area, and rents on the private market are high and unaffordable for a number of people. And again, so the housing register is one route into social housing, but not necessarily the most responsive in certain sets of circumstances. But if somebody is in privately rented accommodation and are threatened with homelessness as a result of not being able to afford their rent, then they would come and seek housing advice from us, and we would work with them to prevent or relieve their homelessness at that point.
Right, thank you. Right, did anyone else have anything? Oh, sorry, David Wixley.
Yeah, actually, I probably want a bit of advice, because I've had a couple of cases lately where people feel they should be in a higher band, and they've appealed, and the appeals have been rejected. I just wonder what the process is, because one of these cases is quite complicated. I don't get the full information from the person who wants to be in a higher band. It's quite a slog, actually. And the other one hasn't been in contact with me recently, so they're both a bit complicated. But if they sort of come back, as it were, or have further contact with them, I just sort of need to know something about the process, because I don't know how the appeal process works, or who they actually deal with. So because I don't know the background, I don't know if there's any scope for their appeal to be successful. What's the route for them to try and get into a higher band?
So, as you might remember, over the course of the last year, we did an extensive piece on the revision of the housing allocation scheme, and that went through scrutiny in the democratic process. So there will be a number of people that have had some band movement since September, when the new scheme was implemented. You can find the allocation scheme on the website. It's I think, quite a well-written document that is fairly self-explanatory about, the needs of people in various different bands. So if people think that we've got the wrong information and and that's why they've been banded incorrectly, they certainly can appeal. So within the Housing Needs Service, there's a Reviews and Performance Officer who will take and look at those appeals independently. So there'll be a first officer that's done that, and it will go to somebody else to have a look at it. So the appeals process is also sort of laid out within that allocation scheme. Unfortunately, though, there are, we have sort of moderate and severe need for medical circumstances, for example, and other things. And while I absolutely appreciate that for individuals they may feel that their set of circumstances is severe, actually when we look at those in line with our allocation scheme, they may not meet that higher category. So once they've gone through that appeals process, there is always, of course, the Housing Ombudsman as a final port of call. But as long as we've made that decision in line with our own allocations policy that's been agreed by members, then, we've exhausted that route, essentially.
Is there sort of one officer, but by name, who I could sort of contact and, if necessary, talk to them to get some further advice on this?
Yeah, what I would say is you can contact the homelessness team leader, so I can give you her details. But please remember that we always need consent. So even with members, we must have consent from applicants in order to talk about individual specific cases.
These people aren't homeless, but one is in a council property already and one is in private rented accommodation.
Yeah, that's fine. It's just that she will be able to allocate you an officer to talk about that specific case. The Reviews and Performance Officer comes within her team.
You'll give me the details.
Right. Thank you, everybody, for coming and having to put up with me. And the date of our future meeting to discuss all these different things is the 21st of March. But before that, we do have the one to deal with the police on the 7th of March. So thank you very much. I'll close this meeting at, well, almost 8:45. Thank you. And good night, everybody. I just